So thank you everyone for coming out. I appreciate you all taking the time to visit with us here today. Today we're going to talk about our iTTP externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. This meeting today is very important to the Ree Wynn Foundation, very important to the iTTP community in general. We're so excited to be able to have this opportunity to host all of you and to have all of you participate. And we'll go through some housekeeping. We'll go through what you should expect for today. We'll also have a short description and education around what the externally led patient focused drug development meeting, or the EL-PFDD, is all about, and how we should all kind of participate and be a part of this community in order to help find a cure for iTTP, or at minimum to find new and better treatments for iTTP. We're excited to do this. Of course, my name again is James Wynn. I am co-founder and president of the Ree Wynn Foundation. We have several people here with us today. My wife, Fonda Wynn, is working behind the scenes, helping to admit folks into the room and help us to keep this going. We have Larry Bauer and James Valentine with Hyman Phelps, who are also going to help us, and we'll talk more about all of them as we continue to go on. Next slide, please. All right, so as I said, welcome. We're going to talk about the externally led patient-focused drug development meeting and the excitement that we have around it. This is an opportunity to have your voices heard. You as a community, whether you're a patient, caregiver, or industry partner, um, it's all about you and having your voices heard, and your opportunity to talk about how iTTP affects you and how you would like to see new treatments and innovations come about. Our primary goal is to hear directly from the patients and caregivers, and to have them talk about their perspective and their experiences with treatments. The outcome that we're hoping for is to improve the development of the new drugs that are coming out, and research that is in the pipeline, and to have ways to innovate and include all of the patients' voices into the development of these new drugs. Our sponsor is Takeda, and we are so happy to be working with Takeda on this. We've been spent a number of months going over how we would kind of pull this off, and Takeda stepped forward and became our sponsor for this event. We have a number of supporters, not least of all USTMA, PDSA, or other groups around the country and around the world that have supported us. So we want to say thank you to all of them first and foremost. And we have some housekeeping quite naturally. Today's webinar is approximately 1 hour. I'm going to say 1 hour, but I do know this group. So we may be a little longer, but that's okay. We want to hear all of your voices. But we're asking everyone to please mute yourself, as we said earlier. Also, we're gonna, as you know, and thank you, Larry, for reminding me, this will be recorded, and it is your opportunity to ask questions about, particularly today, the PFDD, which is the patient-focused drug development meeting that's happening on January 26th. You can type your questions in the chat. We will take you off mute or ask you to come off mute to answer questions at the end as well. But in the chat, we'll have you can type your questions in, and I'll reverberate or give them to our speakers as we move forward. Also, I want to let you know this particular meeting is for iTTP. I know that the CTTP is another form of TTP, and at the Ree Wynn Foundation, we work with folks who have both. But today we're specifically talking about iTTP, and that's not to say that folks with CTTP should not participate. We absolutely want you to participate. In fact, we believe that, there are a lot of similarities in the struggles that you face. So it's important that you do, but we're really focused on that. And then also, we're not answering questions today about any particular treatment or any particular drug that you may have. We're also not answering questions about specific doctors and who you might, or if you need advice on doctors to see. We can answer that separately. So if you do have those questions, we do encourage you to kind of just reach out to us one-on-one, and we'll be able to help you with those questions at another time. Next slide. And the purpose of the meeting is just for us to educate the Food and Drug Administration. You'll learn more about the Food and Drug, or FDA. It's easier to just say it like that, right? You'll learn more about the FDA and their role and new treatments and new drugs that come on the market and how they play a part in that. But it's important for us to let you know, or to let the FDA know, that iTTP is important and it impacts the lives of folks. We want to know, we want you to use your voices to talk about how much it has impacted your life, how you're currently managing with the disease, what are the meaningful treatments, how did they affect you both adversely and for the good as well. So we want to kind of get all of that out, and that is the purpose of the meeting on January 26th. Again, everyone should participate. The question is, why should I participate? We have to hear your voice. The reason we have to hear your voice is, in the past, the FDA didn't hear patients' voices until it was too late, until a drug that was approved had sometimes adverse effects or really negative or harmful side effects with patients, or that a clinical trial was failing because maybe there weren't enough people or didn't have the right people, or wasn't a diverse group of people. This is the opportunity where we can kind of get in the forefront of that and talk about the treatments that we want as a community. Your voices are very important to it. The stakeholder engagement is an FDA priority now. It hadn't been like that always, and to have this opportunity is an extremely great opportunity for us to show, or to use our voice to influence or to help the FDA make the proper decisions to come up with treatments that work for you.
Hey,
All right, with all of that said,
Steve, what are you doing?
hello? All right, remember to put your your remember to go on mute. I'm sorry. As and then hold your questions until the end as well. All right. So without too much further ado, we're gonna talk to James Valentine and Larry Bauer, who's gonna talk to us about what the mechanics of the EL-PFDD, how it works, who can participate, how you participate, what's going to happen with it. James and Larry both have over 15 years of experience. James and Larry both have worked on the inside of the FDA, knowing the PFDD inside and out. James was part of the team that helped develop the PFDD before it became a mechanism that was used externally. And so these guys have a wealth of knowledge and they have a ton of experience. We're happy to work with Hyman Phelps to have us to pull this meeting off. This has been a great undertaking, and many of you who are actually on the Zoom call today, you kind of know a little bit about how much of an undertaking it's been because you're been participating in different meetings with us to kind of get the whole thing started. So with that, James, Larry, please take it away.
Well, James, thank you so much for having us and allowing us to be part of this journey with you to plan this very important externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. It's a pleasure to be here, kicking off the new year with this iTTP community. As you all, get a little bit more information, either to help you feel more prepared to participate in this meeting, or maybe you've joined today and you're, not sure, is this something that I, should be participating in? And we hope by the end of it, we'll have answered that question, and we hope that you ultimately will see that there's great value in participating, because it's so important to hear as many voices as possible from this community, both by the FDA and other important stakeholders like those developing drugs for iTTP. So in our presentation today, we want to give you some background information. It's always good to know your audience. And so we want to tell you a little bit about the FDA and how drugs get developed, where FDA fits into that process. We know some of this might be more of a backgrounder for, or a reminder for you. You might already have some of this background, but we want to make sure the entire community benefits from that, at least a basic understanding of that. We'll then shift gears and really talk about the PFDD meeting, what we're all here to really learn about, give you an overview of that and how you'll be able to participate, so you know what to expect out of the meeting. And I'll be tag teaming this with my colleague, Larry. So I'll get us started on this first section, which again is to give you some background on the FDA and drug development. And I want to start at the beginning. This is really, if you think about, bringing a potential new treatment, the first thing that needs to happen is you need to do, basic science research. We need to understand what is going on with a particular disease, so that way we can know potentially where to intervene in the disease process. And that's where research like that the NIH does, that academic research centers are doing, really helps set the stage and the foundation for what ultimately will become drug development. Once we have an understanding of the disease, and that's always evolving, then that allows us to, either screen existing compounds to see if they might have some potential beneficial effect, or maybe develop new technologies that might be able to help and more directly target a disease process. Once then we actually have identified, a compound that we could take forward into development, development follows a pretty well-established path. And I'm going to walk you through each step of that path, just so you can see really all of what goes into a typical drug development program. So before a drug ever gets studied in people, we have what's called preclinical development. And that's preclinical, meaning pre-clinic or before the clinic, which is where it would be tested in people and humans. And so this preclinical work is where we start. When we're doing studies, preclinical studies are most typically done in animals. And so we want to know, whether the product is reasonably safe to be used in humans. But we also want to know that there's sufficient, a sufficient likelihood that it might be effective in actually treating the disease target. And that can be done through either chemical assay tests or in testing the product in animal models of a particular disease. So we're evaluating the safety. We call those toxicology studies. We're studying the likelihood of effectiveness. We call those pharmacology studies. And the idea is to be able to gather all this preclinical information to put that together in what's called an investigational new drug application, or an IND, that we can take to the FDA to allow us to proceed into clinical trials, so trials in people. So that IND submission, it's going to contain all of those preclinical studies. It's also going to contain manufacturing information. So how is the drug actually made and produced? Where does that happen? Because we not only want to make sure we have some information about how well a drug works and how safe it is, we want to make sure drugs are high quality. We don't want impurities that might be harmful to people. And we don't want, we want to make sure that you're getting what you're supposed to be getting and in the right amount. This IND also includes the plan for clinical trials. This is called a protocol. And the information that's shared with investigators, those are the doctors that run the trials, is all reviewed by FDA. And once FDA, gives the green light, then clinical trials can proceed. The typical first type of clinical trials, what's called a phase 1 clinical trial. These are small, short, usually sometimes starting with single doses and then working their way towards multiple doses, usually starting with low doses, working their way slowly up to higher doses, where we're really trying to see what are the most common side effects and safety concerns, the ones that are going to be, most experienced, because we're not giving this to a large number of people. But that, gives us a sense of what the overall safety profile and whether there's any major safety risks. Because of this and the focus on safety, a lot of times phase 1 trials are done in healthy volunteers, meaning people that don't have a particular disease, because we can see the safety profile without the kind of the complexity of also knowing that, people who have diseases, they have different symptoms and health effects. And we want to know what's really, being driven by the drug versus what's being driven by the disease. But that being said, a lot of the times in rare diseases, we go straight to phase 1 in people, with a condition. So it doesn't have to necessarily start just with the healthy volunteers. So in addition to drug safety, we also can look to see where the drug gets within the body. Is it getting to the parts of the body it needs to? How long does it stay there? How is it getting out of the body? All of that gives us a good sense of how well, the drug and its formulation and the dosing, is actually working within the body. And we may even be able to get some laboratory measures that could give us a signal of if the drug's having the intended effect. Once we know that we have a reasonably safe drug from phase 1, and we have some idea of what dose and dosing regimens might be the ones to carry forward, we can go into phase 2 trials. We begin in phase 2, in this middle phase of clinical trials, to look at drug effectiveness. Sometimes we call these proof of concept studies, because we're trying to see some early evidence or preliminary evidence that a drug does have a treatment effect. But these studies, they still aren't always very long, and they're still in a fairly small subset of people. And so, it gives us some signal, but it's not definitive in telling us if the drug works. Because we're looking at how well the drug works, these phase 2 studies are always in people living with the condition, not the healthy volunteers. A lot of the times in phase 2, we also start to add other aspects of clinical trials, like a placebo control group. So that way we can see what's a result of just being in the trial versus what's actually being, benefits might be gained from the drug itself, as well as to be able to compare safety. So we're also, in addition to early effectiveness, of course, looking at safety, and we're able to start to see some more short-term side effects that we were able to see in phase 1. Ultimately, once we've done some number of phase 1 and 2 studies, we move into phase 3. Sometimes you'll hear this talked about in the press or maybe at conferences as pivotal trials or registrational trials. These are the kind of traditional large-scale randomized, often placebo-controlled trials where we're more definitively answering the question, testing that hypothesis of, does the drug work? Does the drug treat, the intended patient population? So we need more people to be able to answer those questions. The study needs to be of sufficient duration to answer those questions, especially if it's not just like a one-time treatment. It's something that's maybe going to be dosed chronically, maybe even lifelong. We need to see what those effects look like over time. Because these trials are bigger, we get to see how they impact different populations, men versus women, different age groups, people with different severity of disease. We can kind of probe and see where maybe the product is more or less helpful. And we still may in phase 3 be carrying multiple doses to see maybe if, we want to see if amongst 2 different doses, which one has the kind of more acceptable benefit risk profile, that it both works as well as isn't, doesn't have safety issues that would preclude it from getting approved. So, we're looking at throughout all of development at safety. As we move more towards phase 3, we focus more and more on effectiveness. And ultimately, in order to get FDA approval, or in any country to get approval, typically you need at least one of these phase 3 trials. The traditional requirement is 2 phase 3 studies. However, in rare diseases and serious conditions, FDA has the ability to rely on just a single phase 3 trial. So once these phases of clinical trials conclude, while companies are actually developing drugs are meeting with FDA out throughout all of these phases to get inputs on trial designs and bring in new data to show FDA, there's a really important meeting that happens at the end of all of this that's called a pre-new drug application, or NDA, or pre-biologics license application, BLA meeting. This pre-NDA or pre-BLA meeting is an opportunity, before a company actually submits that application to the FDA to talk about all of this data that they've collected, identify what are going to be those pivotal trials, talk about the data and how they analyzed it. And the real important thing is to try to uncover any major issues. Does FDA think that there's additional studies that need to be done, based off of what's been presented to date? You want to know that before you submit that NDA or BLA to FDA for them to review. Ultimately, if there's enough alignment, then the company can come in and submit that NDA or BLA to FDA. That includes everything we've talked about, all of that preclinical or animal data, all of the data from the different phases of clinical trials as well. When that's submitted to FDA, they begin their review. Their review process, takes between 6 to 10 months to do, depending on if it's assigned a priority or standard review. So in the scheme of things, drug development takes many, many years. FDA's review time is only a matter of months, but it's a very important time. FDA is looking to assess whether the drug's effectiveness has been demonstrated. They're looking to see, what the safety profile is, and whatever safety issues there are, because no drug is perfectly safe. We see the advertisements on TV, there's a whole list of side effects for every drug. But do the benefits of the drug actually outweigh the risks of the drug? And I mentioned this early on, there's the third prong of this, which is the drug quality, especially now that we're producing much larger amounts of drug to potentially be able to, be out there for anyone who is going to be prescribed the product. We need to make sure that it's high quality. And so all of the manufacturing controls and data are also provided and reviewed by FDA. Now, you might have heard of something called an FDA advisory committee meeting. And these are often, talked about in the press, where, an FDA advisory committee voted, to support approval or against approval of a drug. This is a meeting that doesn't happen for every NDA or BLA, but it's up to FDA. And if they think there's issues that they'd like to get external expert input on, they can take it to this public meeting where experts will weigh in. But there's also an opportunity in these meetings for the public, including the patient community, to have their voice heard as part of the deliberations. Ultimately, this committee will give its advice to FDA. It's still up to FDA whether or not to approve the drug, and the FDA doesn't have to follow an advisory committee's recommendation. So if FDA does go on to approve a product, the oversight doesn't end there. Once a drug's out there and being used by people, the companies and FDA are continuing to monitor the safety of the product. Clinical trials are it's a subset of all of the people that might actually use the product in the real world. So we actually learn a lot more about the drug's true safety profile once it's out there and in use in the real world. And so that data is collected and reviewed, and ultimately FDA has responsibility to ensure that the benefits of the drug continue to outweigh the risks as they're better characterized. So that's a little bit about the process. I know we covered that very quickly, but we wanted to give everyone a high-level overview of that drug development process. Let's talk just for a few moments about FDA's role in that. So FDA plays important roles, but they're not the one that's actually developing drugs. So it's researchers, pharmaceutical companies, sometimes even nonprofit groups that are taking on and doing this research. At the same time, FDA is also not the one testing these drugs in trials. So FDA is not running those clinical trials we talked about. FDA staff aren't on site when those trials are being run. They kind of bless the overall study plan, but ultimately they're not the ones that are out there running those studies, and they can't make a company run any particular study. Companies need to come and propose studies to them. They'll give input. They can stop a study if it's not going to be safe for patients participating. But really, drug development happens because researchers and drug companies are advancing and bringing and proposing research to the FDA. It's also important to note that once drugs are approved and out on the market, FDA has a very limited role. They're not regulating the practice of medicine. FDA regulates the development and what drug companies can say, how they can market their medical products. But in terms of using them, doctors are free to prescribe those products within their practice of medicine. And so that happens a lot of times, and this is called off-label use, where a drug is used in a population that it wasn't directly approved for. And so FDA doesn't provide, have much authority to provide oversight of that. Similarly, in terms of insurance coverage and price of medicines, that's outside of FDA's scope as well. They don't consider drug prices. Even if they had that information, legally, they don't have any authority to consider that. They're evaluating the evidence of how the drug's benefits against the drug's risks. So I talked a lot about what FDA doesn't do, but let's just talk for a second about what they do. So FDA does play a very important role in helping facilitate drug development. Part of their mission is not just to protect the public health, but help promote the public health. And FDA reviewers, they're clinicians and researchers and scientists who, given their role, they've seen it all. They've seen so many programs come before them. They've seen what works, what doesn't work. So they have a lot of technical expertise, and they provide that to researchers and drug companies when those companies and researchers come to FDA and propose their studies and bring them data. FDA helps provide and offer their insights. And this happens through a whole series of meetings. I didn't outline them all when we walked through the stages of drug development, but I could have put arrows all along that little process at the bottom just to show that companies are going in frequently to meet with FDA and seek their feedback. I've covered all of this at a very rapid pace. I totally appreciate that. If you'd like to learn more about how FDA regulates medical products, as well as just generally ways to be involved with FDA, they have a website here, fda.gov/for-patients. It's a great resource for additional information. But at this point, let's shift gears to what's really important in the core of this patient-focused drug development meeting, which is your voices as patients and as caregivers. And so I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Larry, to talk about where your voice fits in and how the PFDD is going to bring your voice into the conversation.
Thank you, James. Thanks for that great overview of drug development. As James said, I'm going to share a little bit more about this specific meeting for your community. Next slide. So I think at the very beginning, James Wynn spoke a little bit about the purpose of this meeting that we're planning. So these patient-focused drug development meetings were developed by the FDA because, as we talked a little bit about earlier, that when they develop, drug companies would want to develop a new drug. They would talk to doctors, they would talk to scientists, and they realized an important voice was missing from the discussion, and that was the voice of people living with the condition. And they wanted to develop a way to get that input in a more systematic way. So they decided to try these meetings called patient-focused drug development meetings that were one-day-long meetings focused on a specific disease where the FDA listened to and tried to learn from people living with the condition. And this kind of input really helps the staff at the FDA, both as a drug is being developed, as well as when they're reviewing all the data that's coming in and they're trying to consider whether or not to approve a new drug. Next. So when FDA is trying to, they're reviewing a drug, they do something called a benefit risk assessment. This is an evaluation of the benefits of the new drug. So what did we see in clinical studies versus what are the risks of the new drug? So what do we see as side effects? And do the benefits of the new drug outweigh the risks? So part of this analysis, they want to understand what the disease is, what is the condition, what kind of symptoms do people have, how do those symptoms impact their lives, and they also want to know what's available on the market already for that, for that disease. So if it's a disease that doesn't have any other treatments, they're going to be, pretty open to hearing about how they could possibly try to make it work so that there is a new treatment that's becomes available. Next slide. So our meeting it's called an externally led patient-focused drug development meeting. So it's going to be based on the framework of the FDA type meetings. We're going to have the same type of discussion questions that the FDA used. The only difference is that the FDA is not sponsoring this meeting. This meeting is being sponsored by the Ree Wynn Foundation. The FDA has emphasized that active patient involvement and participation is the key to the success of these meetings. Next slide. So, and then people often ask, so what is the outcome at the end of the day? So we will take everything that we hear on the day of the meeting and write it up into a report called the Voice of the Patient Report. This would be Kanisha.
Sorry, I'm sorry, Larry. Everyone, please mute yourselves so that we're not hearing feedback as Larry's speaking. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. So I said, like, they're going to take everything that we hear on the day of the meeting and write it up into a report called the Voice of the Patient Report for people with iTTP. It'll be a summary of what we hear from patients and caregivers, audience testimony. We're going to do some telephone polling, so we'll include that data as well as written comments that you will submit. This document becomes a key communication to the FDA review staff. And if there's ever a new treatment, and when there is a new treatment for iTTP being developed, they will go back and use this Voice of the Patient report as a resource for them. And the FDA has told us that they really want this information, that it informs them about ways that new meaningful treatments for iTTP can be developed. Next slide. So now, how do you participate in the meeting? So just a little bit more in detail. So who is this for? It's a public meeting. It's for iTTP patients and their caregivers. We've invited the FDA to participate and listen. We've invited people from the pharmaceutical industry and biotech companies. And it's, like I said, it's public. So anyone who wants to learn about iTTP, you can invite family, friends, your doctors, anyone. It'll take place on January 26th. So just a few weeks from now. It starts at 10 a.m. in the morning and it ends at 3:00 p.m. in the afternoon with a half-hour break for lunch. It's a virtual meeting, so people can tune in from wherever they are. And in the United States or actually anywhere in the world. And here's a link to the live stream, which will be on the Ree Wynn website. Next slide. So just to go over the agenda for the day, what we'll be talking about, we'll start out with a welcome and some introductory comments from the Ree Wynn Foundation, as well as from a representative from the FDA. Then we're going to hear a clinical background about iTTP, this is from an expert that will just give us some basic scientific understanding of iTTP. After that, the discussion is going to be broken into two major topics. The first one will be about how iTTP symptoms affect your life. So, what kind of symptoms do people experience? What kind of impacts has it had on your life? And then the second, in the afternoon, we'll shift gears to how you manage those symptoms and current and future approaches to treatment. So what kind of things have you tried, or have you ever participated in a clinical trial? What works, what doesn't work so well? We'll talk about all those kinds of things. The topics for each of those sessions, we'll have some pre-recorded patient panels. These are some people that have worked in advance of the meeting and recorded a statement. We also will have live polling questions, which you'll be able to do on your telephone, as well as a moderated discussion with the audience, who is you. At the end of the day, we will have a summary of the meeting and some closing remarks. Next slide. So just to give you an example of some of the things that we might be talking about, for topic 1 in the morning, where it's about symptoms and impacts, we might ask you, of all the symptoms of iTTP, which 1 to 3 symptoms have the most significant impact on you or your loved one's life? How does iTTP affect you on your best days and worst days? Maybe are there specific activities that are important to you that you or your loved one can't do, or maybe not do as fully because of having iTTP? Next slide. Also, how have your symptoms changed over time? And how has your ability to cope with those symptoms changed over time? And then what do you fear most as you or your loved one gets older? So what do you worry about this condition, and what frustrates you the most about this condition? Next. In the afternoon, as I said, we're going to shift gears a little bit, talking about treatments. So some of the questions might be, what are you currently doing to manage your iTTP symptoms? How well do these symptoms treat the most significant symptoms of iTTP? And what are the downsides to these treatments? Are there side effects? Are they difficult to take? Do you have to go to the hospital to get a certain treatment? And finally, short of a complete cure, which we know everybody would like to see, what specific things would you look for in an ideal treatment for iTTP? So if something new was being developed, what would you like to see? Next slide. The discussion format, I said, we're going to have these pre-recorded panelists, and we're also going to have 5 people that are on a live Zoom call that we'll discuss. These people will set the foundation for the broader audience discussion. We're going to do polling, which will be explained on the day of the meeting. You'll just be able to use your cell phone. And then we're going to also have a live discussion with the audience. The purpose of this is to build on the experiences that were shared by the panel. There'll be a telephone number at the top of your screen, and you are welcome to call in. When you call in, you'll have just a brief interview, with your name and what you wanted to talk about. You'll be put into a queue, and we'll try to get to as many live callers as possible. And don't worry, if you call in, you'll still be able to hear the meeting going on, so you won't miss anything. Next. So a couple tips to participate effectively. James earlier mentioned what the FDA's role and their purpose, and the purpose of the meeting. So please remember that. Think about these discussion questions I just mentioned. And if you've got something important you'd like to share, try to relate it to the topic that's being discussed in the meeting. And please pick up your phone and call in. And know it's okay to reiterate a feeling or experience that somebody else already have spoken about. But if you do, give it a personal or unique perspective. We ask that you try to keep your comments concise and focused, because we want to hear from as many people as possible. And please know that at the end of the day, you can always send in additional comments after the meeting. Next slide. So as I mentioned earlier, this meeting will be webcast, so you'll be able to tune in on your computer or on your cell phone. You'll be able to answer polling questions on your telephone, and you can call in on your telephone with comments and contributions you'd like to make to the meeting. You can pre-register now at the Ree Wynn Foundation website. And as I said, the comments with answers to the questions, they can be submitted now, or you can do it after the meeting. So maybe after the meeting, something comes to mind that you say, God, I wish I had shared that. You can put it into a written comment. Next slide. So in summary, this is really your opportunity to be part of this process to impact drug development for iTTP. Your collective voices, they really have to be heard at the beginning of the drug development process so that companies that are designing clinical trials will better meet your needs, and to help the FDA assess the risks and benefits with a full understanding of iTTP. There's a typo there, GM2. This should be iTTP and the patient perspective. So please, we hope you participate, help make a difference. Next slide. So now we've got about 10, 15 minutes left. I see that we've got a few things in the chat. Okay, but not questions. If we've kind of given you guys a lot of information, both about drug development as well about the meeting. So what questions do you have? If you could either type them into the chat, or you can come off a mute and we will do our best to answer the questions. Does anyone, any?
Well, let me just say, guys, don't embarrass me. I told Larry and James that you guys are very talkative and that you'll be all up in this. So ask a question.
If you have the question, it's very likely others have it as well. So we're very happy to answer questions about FDA, drug development, this meeting, anything that we've covered today.
One question that comes up sometimes, I mentioned that we're going to summarize this meeting into a voice of the patient report. So that's not just for the FDA. That is, the FDA will have a link to that report. The report will live on the Ree Wynn Foundation website, and it will be in the public domain. So anyone who wants to read the voice of the patient report can do so. That can be, a drug company that's maybe thinking about developing a new product for iTTP. It could be a family member. Maybe you know someone who's newly diagnosed with iTTP and they don't understand it very well. Anybody can go and read the report.
That's a great point, Larry. We do have a question here from Amanda Schwartz. Amanda is asking, and for whatever reason, she's saying she can't unmute. Everyone should be able to unmute. Are other folks having that same issue? Just type it in the chat if you are, and if Fonda, if you can help with that. I don't know if that's an issue on our end, but should we be on video during the meeting on the 26th? Remember, Amanda is one of the panelists as well. So our question is, should we be on video?
Right. So for everyone in our audience today, if you go and you pre-register at the Ree Wynn Foundation website, you'll be provided a link. It's actually the same link that's currently being used for the pre-registration website for where to go on the live meeting day. You're just going to go to that website. You could bookmark it now and just show up on the 26th. And what you're going to see when you arrive there is a little form that asks you to just say, hey, who are you? And then you're going to, once you click enter on that, you're going to be redirected to the live player. So think of it as like a YouTube player. It's going to be embedded in the website. So all you have to do is show up, and you're going to be able to see and hear the meeting. You'll be able to participate fully remotely from that web page. There'll be a form for you to submit the written comments. There'll be a phone number for you to be able to call in, like Larry talked about. Think of it just like calling into the radio. You call in, someone talks to you offline, puts you on hold, and then the DJ brings you into the live program in a couple of minutes. It's exactly like that. And I'll be moderating the meeting with James Wynn. And so you'll be actually talking to us, when you call in. So everybody here can participate live just right from the website. It's not over Zoom or Microsoft Teams or any other kind of video conferencing platform. Think of it like you're tuning into like a news program almost. And you're going to see, James and James co-anchors, and we're going to be bringing you all into the program using those different tools that Larry talked about.
Thank you, James. So some of you have already registered for the 26th, and it might feel like it's a Zoom, but that is just for the pre-registration. You're going to be sent the live link later, as James Valentine said. We have a question from Kathy Lengus. Kathy is saying, I understand there are currently drugs in development. Can you address that? And is that why this meeting is happening? Kathy, no, this meeting is not happening because there are drugs in development. This meeting is happening because we want to give the FDA your voice to help industry partners to develop the right kind of drugs. I have a suspicion that, from now on, and even though it's been many years that there were no treatments for iTTP, now there are, and there may be going forward additional treatments coming through. But the idea of this meeting is to help shape and mold those treatments to fit what the patients are asking for, what the patients are saying that they need and they want in terms of a treatment for iTTP.
Yeah, and I'll just add, the PFDD input is valuable at all stages of development. So the same questions that we're asking can be used early in development to help design those very first clinical trials and all the different clinical trials I talked about, make sure we're measuring things that are important to you all. But it's also valuable for those drugs that are already, along the way and are generating data, because FDA needs to evaluate that data, and we want them to evaluate it through the lens of what is important to patients. So it's a good question, Kathy. And so it is, for drugs that are in development, this is going to benefit them no matter what stage in development they're currently in.
And Kanisha has a question, James. Will people be able to ask the panelists questions during the meeting?
It's a good question, and the answer is no. You all are experts. You're the people living with iTTP. You're caregivers of people living with iTTP, whether you're even family members, friends. We need to hear from you and hear as many voices as possible of you sharing your experiences, you telling us your preferences for future treatments. So we're going to be posing questions, the types of questions that Larry walked us through in the slides. And we're going to be asking you to raise your hand virtually by calling in, writing in, answering polling questions. So you all are the people who'll be doing the answering. If you have, questions, about the process or anything like that, you can ask them today. You can ask them to James, and we can always help answer those questions. But during the live meeting, think of it as like a really big focus group. You all are our experts, and we're going to be tapping into your experiences, knowledge, and insights.
Yeah, so I see we have a question about, James had gone over the different phases of drug development, and is there a large percentage of drugs that never pass the first phase of research? Drug development is a difficult process. Sometimes, you have a good idea, you think a drug is going to work, maybe it even works in animals, like an animal model for that disease. Unfortunately, about 90% of drugs fail at some point in the development process. So it is a very challenging process. So yeah, it's got a lot of pitfalls along the way. So the ones that make it are, success stories.
And Beth McGraw has a question. How many people do we estimate will be in the meeting? And is this the first time that we've done something like this for iTTP? The
Well, it's
answer,
hard to estimate how many people will be in the meeting. We hope that everyone that's on today will help get the word out. Whether it's people in your own personal circles, if you're living with iTTP, who are the people close to you in your life that might, see what you're going through and have a perspective on that. Or who do you know within this community, that might not be on with us today, or could participate in the meeting. Of course, those are who we want to hear from. There's lots of people who could benefit from listening. Are there doctors and researchers out there that you want to invite so they get the benefit of learning from you all? You can absolutely invite people who, may not be the people we're asking to speak, but still, this is going to be a really, really great educational day for so many who might tune in and listen. So it's hard to estimate exactly how many people will attend, but it's we're still in the stages of getting people to pre-register. That's what this webinar today is all about. So we hope that you'll register if you haven't already, and you'll help get the word out.
thanks, James. You brought up a great point that a lot of you have spoken in the past about the physicians that you work with or that have treated you in the past, and whether or not you felt that they heard you or understood your symptoms, understood the iTTP perspective and how you were feeling and things like that. So we're going to work very hard at reaching out to medical facilities and other medical education types of institutions. You also can reach out to your doctor and say, "Hey, here's a an opportunity for you to learn more about this condition, to talk more," and they can come in and be a part of the call, be a part of the day, and perhaps be educated.
I see we have a question from Kathy about, do you know what companies currently have new drug treatments in development? So the purpose of this meeting is not to focus on, specific treatments, but rather to gather this patient perspective that could be used in any new drug development program. One thing I do want to let you know is at the beginning of the afternoon session, we are going to have a 10-minute overview of the current treatment landscape from Dr. Adam Suker, that maybe some of you know from University of Pennsylvania. And in Dr. Suker's talk, he is going to review some of the clinical trials and for drugs that are currently going on. But he will treat each drug equally without giving, the purpose of this meeting is not to promote any one treatment or any specific company, but we hope to support them all.
And Kristen is asking, should people join if they can't commit to the whole meeting and are only available for part of the meeting? The answer is yes.
That's right.
Absolutely.
So
Come on
yeah,
in.
if you can join in the morning time, and we'll be focusing more, as Larry talked about, on the symptoms and health effects and what daily life looks like living with iTTP. Join then, participate in answering questions. Then, if you can join in the afternoon time more, where we're focused on what treatment approaches are you using, what are you looking for from future treatments, you can participate in that. And for the part you couldn't join, you'll be able to go and watch it on demand. As soon as the day ends, that recording will be posted live. And then you can also go and help still answer those questions that for the part of the day you missed by submitting written comments. And like Larry mentioned, those will be is available to answer questions or give your input for 30 days after the meeting. And so maybe something comes up and you can't attend at all during the day. Please still go ahead and you can go and watch the meeting, or you can just go and submit some written comments, because all of those comments will be incorporated into that voice of the patient report, which is going to be the summary of the important day. Well, James, everybody stepped up here. You did not get embarrassed by your community members. These were really, really good questions. I'm so thankful everyone asked them. But I think we can turn it back to you now to wrap things up.
Absolutely. Thank you all for participating. And I am really happy with the turnout that we had today. We had 33 people actually join, and most of you stayed till the end. So we are excited about that. We're excited about this opportunity to help to push your voice forward to the FDA so that new treatments are created. We ask that each and every one of you remember the link here. Of course, it'll be on our website, and you guys know how we do on our website. We will create a pop-up so it's nice and easy. It'll be front and center for you to sign up for the meeting on January 26th. We'll send out reminders. We're asking you to help us with social media. So if you're on Facebook or Twitter or anything like that, like, share, invite others to participate. Thank you all for your time and your effort today, for your voices, for your courage. When we ask that you have a great day, and until next time we speak, we'll see you later. Bye-bye.